Now, people think of Venus in Gemini as overly promiscuous, but it's just that they like to taste everything in the candy shop, right? If something is new, they gotta put their mouth on it, right? So today, May 23rd, Venus enters Gemini. But personally, I think it's more accurate to say that Gemini enters Venus. Let's look at the fun chart here, shall we? So here we can see Venus, right, in very late Taurus, 29 degrees, 52 minutes. Now let's just go ahead a few hours. There's Mummy Venus at 58 minutes. Boom! And now she's in Gemini. So what does this mean for you, for me, for us? Well, we're going to talk about your horoscopes for Venus and Gemini at the end. So please make sure you watch this whole thing, okay? But first, let's talk about what it means in general. Now, what's Venus? She's my mama, right? She's also our lewd and lascivious lady of lust, right? She rules beauty, romance, pleasure, nice things. She's our whole social nature, not just our romantic nature, right? It's how we connect with people. Well, and then what about Gemini? Well, Gemini, of course, gets a lot of its meaning from the fact that it's ruled by Mercury, right? Our non-binary neighbor. Yeah. So this is that time of year also, Gemini season, where the sun is moving northwards, or rather at the end of its northward part of its cycle. It is rising up towards its zenith at the summer solstice. So we can see some of the optimistic significations of Gemini coming from the fact that it's at that point in the solar cycle, right? It's an air sign. It's masculine, right? So I think of it as Mercury turned outward, as opposed to Virgo, which is on the waning side of the solar cycle, right? And it's an earth sign and it's feminine. So that's more like Mercury turned inwards, yes? Now, it's also a mutable sign, right? And mutable means changeable. So we see changeability when it comes to, well, Gemini and Virgo. They're both mutable signs. But Gemini especially is sort of known for its inconsistencies. I mean, I would know. I just had my birthday yesterday. Hooray, Gemini! I mean, I'm proud to be a Gemini, quite frankly. I think it's wonderful. It makes me more interesting. But anyway, inconsistency, right? I mean, Gemini is one of those types of signs that holds two conflicting opinions at the same time, right? I'm like, oh, look, Venus in Gemini. So remember, don't be yourself, right? Because Gemini Venus has more personalities than they do alt accounts on social media. Now, people think of Venus in Gemini as overly promiscuous, but it's just that they like to taste everything in the candy shop, right? If something is new, they gotta put their mouth on it, right? You know? I always tell Gemini Venus people, humans are not Pokemon. You don't have to fuck them all, right? But seriously, Gemini people are such flakes. I mean, we're the type of people who double book ourselves and bail on both sets of plans, don't we? I mean, hey, Aquarius brought us artificial intelligence, right? But Gemini brought us superficial intelligence. Boom. But all jokes aside, what do we usually see from Venus in Gemini? What sort of presentation or expression is that? Well, number one, curiosity. It's the desire for many types of varied experiences. Now, that can also mean a scattered attention or scattered interests, right? ADHD type stuff. You know, we think of Gemini people as having a whole library full of half-read books. Anyway, there's an innate desire to connect with different types of people, right? Venus in Gemini can often relate to many other people from all different areas of social strata. They don't often discriminate. The stereotype, though, of having lots of different romantic partners probably comes from this desire, right? We also see a tendency to share ideas and to connect intellectually, yes? Finding affinity between all different points of view, perhaps, and being able to connect with people. So, some examples of this from birth charts. First, we see Margot Robbie. I love her. She's my Barbie, right? She's been known for hyperactivity since she was a child. She's very extroverted. We can also see her incredible range of acting in many different films. Now, my favorite characters of hers, of course, are Barbie and Harley Quinn. I feel like in my heart of hearts, I'm really just Harley Quinn. And you can see the Gemini dualism between these seemingly opposite characters, right? But they have the similarity of still struggling with the systemic oppression of a male-dominated world. I'm a Barbie girl in a Ken world. Life is drastic, not fantastic. People like to stare and things are so unfair. Alienation and isolation. I mean, that's more the Saturn girl song. I'm a Saturn girl in a Saturn world. That's actually where I got the name Saturn Girl, was from me singing that song. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But then we have Amy Schumer, who I'm not particularly a big fan of. I don't really think she's funny. But she's sort of like the stereotypical Gemini Venus, isn't she? Right? I mean, she's pretty open about her promiscuity. And, in fact, she makes loads of jokes about it. Right? She's also an extrovert. And recently, she's tried to get political without really understanding world affairs. Oh, Gemini, if you don't know what you're talking about, just make shit up, right? We don't read the actual articles, just the headlines. Well, then we have Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, hey, what's the deal with me and young women? I mean, hey, who are these people? It's a really bad Seinfeld impression. It's more like Gilbert Gottfried doing Seinfeld. Anyway. But Seinfeld has had a sordid love life, as Gemini Venus is known for. Infamously dating, allegedly, I don't want to get in trouble, but infamously dating a 17-year-old when he was 38 years old. I mean, being a sleazeball isn't necessarily a Gemini Venus trait, but he sure is good at it. Most recently, though, he's been whining that people don't laugh at his jokes. Apparently, he's the only one who thinks he's funny. I mean, him and Amy Schumer have a lot in common now, don't they? Boom, boom. I don't think they're funny. But you may disagree. But seriously, when Venus is in Gemini, it's a good time to socialize, to put yourself out there, meet new friends, and perhaps new lovers. Explore your intellectual curiosity. I mean, try different things. Learn about world affairs, and so you actually have a substantive opinion to talk about. Learn about your own community, people around you. Share your opinions and ideas after you have enough information and facts to back them up. But most of all, practice being lighthearted and having fun, right? This is a time when you should be meeting lots of people and feeding your mind, right? Get a book. Even if you only read half of it, at least you're going to improve your idea of the way things are around you. But now it's time for your horoscopes. If we want to see how these transits affect our everyday lives, we have to see the houses that they are occurring in. So I do these horoscopes for each rising sign. But if you don't know it, you can watch for your sun sign. Okay? Let's go to the chart. First, we're going to do Aries rising. So for Aries rising, this means Venus is entering the third house for you. The third house, of course, is siblings, communication, extended family in general, our immediate community. Yes? This is a time when we can cultivate better relationships with our family or our siblings or whoever. But if you have a sister, right, you may reconnect with them in particular, because Venus represents women, of course. But oftentimes what we see is having diplomatic relations with people in our community. It's also more diplomatic type speech. Venus rules Libra, right? And she has to do with relations and making connections. And she's aware of different social conventions and cues. So take this time to put beauty to words, whether that's writing poetry, some interesting prose, trying to articulate one of your ideas or your views through writing, speaking, or poetry, right? This is a very creative type time for you. Now, let's move on to Taurus rising. So for our Taurus rising homies, this means Venus is going into the second house here, right? The second house is our stuff, right? Our livelihood, money, finances, sometimes building up a business, right? Being that it's our livelihood, it does indicate some career things here. So there's the possibility that you could see a little modest increase of income. At the very least, you might want to spend money on nice things. Remember, Venus is pleasure, right? She also rules Taurus and has to do with pretty things, nice metals and necklaces and whatever, right? Emeralds, right? So take this opportunity if you can to indulge just a little bit, right? Don't spend more than you have, of course. But this is a prelude to Jupiter going into your second house, which is also about building up your livelihood. And if you do have a business, definitely a time to start managing your resources. But let's move on to Gemini rising. Our Gemini rising Hermes. So for Gemini rising, this means Venus is going into your first house. And this is so fun because it's your time to sparkle. Sometimes I make romantic partners when Venus goes over my ascendant, right? I'm Aquarius rising though. But this is a time where you feel beautiful. You feel confident. You want to connect. You want to radiate. Even if you don't want to, you probably do. So take this opportunity, especially after Venus was in your 12th house, kind of making you a little secluded and focusing on self-care. Now it's time to be outward facing, right? Start to meet people. Put on those fancy shoes. Try something new with your hair. And be a little bit like that Mayflower that attracts the bumblebees, right? The birds and the bees. Pollination. I love human pollination. With protection, of course. Anyway, let's move on to Cancer rising. So for our Cancer rising homies, this means Venus is going into the 12th house. And remember, after Venus had been in the 11th house, maybe socially draining your battery or being perhaps a bit exhausting, going into the 12th house prompts us to turn inward a little bit, even though Venus in Gemini is typically turned outward. You see, but this indicates self-care. Maybe you get into therapy or make progress in therapy. Perhaps you find pleasure in your own company. That's part of it too. So make sure to practice self-care here. You might want to be alone to process big emotions, things that had been happening. So please, 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 please don't feel obligated to connect with people. This is the one house placement when you should really be focused on yourself. Okay? Now, let's move on to Leo rising. We love Leo rising, don't we? We sure do. So for Leo rising people, this means Venus is going into your 11th house of friends, optimism, hopes, dreams, wishes. And this does oftentimes amplify our social life, right? We feel the need and the pull to connect with lots of different people, which is wonderful. As we get to the end of the transit, though, oftentimes we feel a bit drained and spent. So just be aware of that. This is great, though, for getting support from people who like what you do, right? Venus was just in your 10th house, which often brings recognition, which often brings accomplishments, and brings new opportunities. Then Venus going into the 11th house is all about putting these opportunities or these accomplishments out on Front Street, right? That's how we get support from people, right? This is fans and friends and supporters and like-minded people, you see? After having a little bit of prominence, then we have to connect. So oftentimes it's fame and popularity too. Maybe you put a piece of work out for people to see and get good reception because it's Venus, okay? Now, let's move on to Virgo rising. Virgo rising. This means Venus is going into your 10th house, right? That's life direction. You know, that's why it's associated with our career, our work, what we're sort of known for, our public image. So with Venus going here, it's getting good press or good recognition. Perhaps someone at work notices what you do well. Perhaps a new opportunity comes up. I always say this is time to polish our resumes because things might pop up that you weren't expecting. Yes? And you want to be ready for it. You want to put on the good presentation. You want to look as attractive as possible to potential employers. Yes? So this is a wonderful time for good press, as I said, for having a good reputation, for people taking an interest in what you do and accomplish. But anyway, let's move on here to Libra rising, as a beautiful young lady likes to say, Libra. So for Libra rising, this means Venus is going into your 9th house as a prelude to Jupiter going in there. And of course, right, the 9th house has to do with our spirituality, our worldview, our politics, our values. It's also higher education, philosophy, and it can be long distance travels or foreign cultures. Sometimes when we see Venus go in the 9th house, a woman from a different culture has an influence on us or pops up into our lives. The other thing that happens here is a renewed interest in spirituality, religion, philosophy. Perhaps we get more interested in politics or our worldview. Remember, I was talking about Venus and Gemini, getting enough understanding in order to present a coherent opinion. So that is another thing for our Libra rising people, because there is no end to the depths of Libra's superficiality. But the other thing that we could often see is harmony when it comes to our beliefs. Because sometimes we've had a schism or a rejection of the worldviews that we grew up with. And this represents cultivating a new one that's more representative of who we are and who we've become. But now let's move on to Scorpio rising. So for our Scorpio rising homies, this means Venus is moving into the 8th house. The 8th house. And the 8th house, remember, is other people's stuff, other people's money, other people's resources, debt, taxes, also death. Death, that's right. Now, associated with other people's stuff, to me, is making amends, right? Forgiveness, all that sort of thing. Because forgiveness is squaring an emotional debt, right? I always make the square hand thing. But it's quite important, isn't it? Because we stuff our traumas and our resentment and all that hidden stuff down into the 8th house. So when I see Venus traveling through there, I think of forgiveness. I think of letting go, and letting go gracefully, right? Not holding grudges or resentment. Now, it could present things like tax refunds, a little increase of income, an unexpected gift, right? Sometimes from a death situation. So just be aware of that. And then Jupiter will go into the 8th house, once again, indicating some monetary recompense or luck or money from someone passing. Yes? But anyway, let's move on here to Snagi-ma-ttarius rising. So for our Snagi-ma-ttarius rising friends, this means Venus is going into the 7th house of relationships, partnerships especially, but we also see adversaries and opponents and contests, right? So there's a couple of things we commonly see with this. We see the possibility of new relationships popping up, you know. Venus represents women, of course, but, you know, it doesn't have to be. But we do expect new romantic liaisons to pop up. If you're already with someone and monogamous, then this is the date night transit. It's time to take your partner out, to enjoy your partner's company, right? And sometimes it's a good time to balance these oppositions in our lives, right? If we've been competing with someone, it's time to let it go and compete with ourselves. My dad used to always tell me, the most important competitor is with yourself, right? We should always be competing with ourselves to be better than we were the previous day, right? But yes, new romantic possibilities could pop up into your life that you didn't quite expect. And on the other hand, cultivating the ones that you're already engaged in. So finding more time with your lover, finding more opportunities to express how you feel and how important they are to you. But anyway, let's move on to Crapricorn and Crapricorn rising. So for our Capricorn rising friends, it's just a joke. Relax, okay? For our Capricorn rising friends, Venus goes into the 6th house. Now, this is one of the more difficult houses, like the 12th house. The difficult ones are 12, 8, 6. But the 6th house, as opposed to the 12th, right? 12th has to do with mental health issues, right? Addiction and stuff like that. Whereas the 6th house is physical health issues. We have injuries, illnesses, enemies, and obligations, the stuff that we have to do. When Venus goes into the 6th house, it's an opportunity to practice better nutrition, perhaps better exercise, better sleep. We have to take care of our bodies, right? The 6th house is the stuff that we have to take care of, otherwise it falls apart. Takes effort. So this is a time to put effort into feeling good. Yes? Putting effort into being the best physical condition that you can. Not just for yourself, but for those around you, because this is also obligations. And Venus in the 6th house is finding the effort and the desire to do the things that she doesn't want to do. She's got to organize, make lists, right? So yes, we're doing self-care. We're dropping bath bombs, yeah? But we're also learning to get things done, right? And to address this, like the other day, you know, I had to file a bunch of paperwork that I didn't want to do. But once we finish that, not only do we feel accomplished, but oftentimes we've put ourselves in a better position for later. So please, Capricorn rising, do the things that you don't want to do. The constructive things, of course. Now let's move on to Aquarius rising. Aquarimus rising. So for Aquarius rising, this is me. I'm Aquarius rising. And my Hermes, yes? For Aquarius rising, this means Venus has just gone into our 5th house, right? Which is all about sex and pleasure, but also children, right? So oftentimes, if you do have children, we could see them having some good luck. Or having fun, right? Taking our kids out to do fun things. Taking them to, I don't know, an amusement park or Sky Zone, or just outside, you know, to go biking or whatever. Or we like to go roller skating. I love roller skating. So much fun. Stuff like that. But also, once again, casual romantic liaisons, which are like air to me. It's like the life breath. I need casual romantic liaisons, otherwise, I sort of shrivel up, like a raisin. I feel not like myself, right? It's like sustenance to me. But it's not just sex and romance, it's pleasure and fun in general. So taking time for ourselves to enjoy ourselves, whatever that is. Once again, for me, it's roller skating, you know, also making content, being out in the sun. It's like, I wish I could just photosynthesize. Anyway, let's move on to Pisces rising. Our Pisces rising Hermes. So this means Venus is entering your fourth house of home, private life, your father, stuff like that. Family legacy and genealogy. So sometimes Venus going in here represents decorating around the home or trying to beautify our home space. It could be that you find pleasure in your own company, in your private life. Sort of similar to the 12th house, but that's sort of like in our own mind. This is in our own space, right? You may get attracted to genealogy or family history. You might want to do one of those 23andMe things, or I don't know, like there's all sorts of different ones, and you may find out some interesting stuff, hopefully good stuff because it's Venus. For those of you who still have fathers or parents, alive, you could be reconnecting with them or experience more harmonious relationships with them. So try and take advantage of this because you never know what can happen. I'm not trying to be morbid or anything, but you never know what can happen. And it's better to say, I love you, right? To say, I love you, rather than not have said it and have something happen, to keep connections. Remember that Venus in Gemini is all about making connections and cultivating them. So if that's your parents or, once again, beautifying your household, all these sorts of things can go into having a pleasurable sense in your private life. I hope this was useful for you. Remember, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, comment below because I want to know what you think, and it helps me out with the algorithm. Also, please click the bell when you subscribe so that you get notified when my new videos drop. And my videos are the best, of course. And please, 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 please consider tipping me, right? It helps me to keep making this wonderful content, of course. And I'm very cute and I'm very funny. And I know my stuff. So you really want to watch my videos. I know you do. You can either give by clicking super thanks below, or you can go to my, where's my Patreon? There. You can go to my Patreon and donate there. So please, 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 if you can't give, just watch all my videos all the way through, including the commercials. Then you don't have to pay me because advertisers will. Also, I do the best readings. It's science. You can either book by going to my website, frankielynch.com, or all my contact information is below in the description. So please check it out, okay? Now, I also have YouTube memberships, and there are great perks for each of the levels. So please, please, please consider joining my channel as a member. But the most important thing, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a spectacular, whatever it is you're having.